Welcome to the Higher Love with Megan podcast with me, your host, Megan Cooper, a holistic coach and trauma-informed practitioner. This podcast seeks to break out of the echo chamber of societal narratives that perpetuate our institutions and challenge the status quo of wellness and beyond. Join me as we decolonize our minds, address and use our privilege, and prioritize inclusivity. Here, diverse experiences are honoured, and together we are fostering a space that stands for higher love for all. As a listener, you are not just here to passively consume. You're an ambassador for deep healing and societal evolutions, ready to engage in thought-provoking, challenging conversations. As your host, I'm committed to providing ever-expansive spaces that inspire us to contribute to a world defined by higher love. Thank you for joining me on this journey. Leata-Mae Davwan, she, they, is an expansive full-spectrum doula and well-being facilitator, rooting her work in decolonising rest and the art of slowing down. Her mission is to centre embodied rest as a pathway to uplifting collective healing and liberation. Highly skilled in holding space for people to come home to themselves, Leata-Mae's offerings support people in shifting to a more deliberate way of living. So I'm really excited to have this conversation with you today. You know, as I was just saying to you, on a professional context for the podcast, I think it's an amazing conversation to be having, but also just on a personal note, this topic of rest, well, it's just needed for everyone, isn't it? So I'm just really excited to be having this conversation with you today. So thanks so much for your time and for being here.
Thank you so much for having me. I'm very happy to be here. I'm always happy to talk about rest, and I'm that person who's always shouting at people, go sit down. So this is a great opportunity to put it out to more people.
Yes, amazing. So one of the first things that I just wanted to touch on was, you know, obviously you've moved from the expansive full spectrum doula space into rest. So I just wanted to ask, what was the inspiration for that move? And, you know, what was the inspiration for you moving into this area from what you were doing before?
Well, rather than it being framed as sort of like a move, I would say it's more of an expansion, because in the work that I do, which is essentially just holding space for people going through the kind of big transitions throughout their lives, I've always rooted it in slowing down and coming back to rest. And, you know, so this isn't new work for me. This is more of just an extension of what I've always done. But I'm really decided to kind of refocus it all about rest and how our relationships to it impact everything, our relationships to each other, ourselves, everything. So I think rest is something that I hold very close to me, and it's not something that's always been easy. It's not necessarily something that I've always been able to do myself. I have had many barriers and challenges to it, but since becoming a parent, that was for me the kind of key marker of when I really started to decolonize my thinking and just reprogram what my ideas around rest and slowing down was. Because when you have a baby, especially kind of in like Western society, you are thrown all of these messages, and a lot of them, without realizing, are rooted in upholding this kind of urgency culture, you know, even from the way that you're giving birth. You have to give birth at a certain time. You have to be in labor for a certain amount of hours. You have to breastfeed for a certain amount of time, sleep train when they're this age, this, that, and the other, you know, 6-week checkup. There's so many things where kind of like timelines and deadlines were introduced, and it just never felt right to me, and it didn't feel right to my body. And the same was for all the clients that I was interacting with. You know, everyone was coming with this big struggle of, I know I'm supposed to do this, that, and the other. I know I should do this, that, and the other, but I just want to sit down. I just want to rest. I just want to, you know, take it slower, and having all of these challenges, mainly because of societal expectations around being able to actually do that. So that's kind of what's refocused my work to be like, okay, this is so much more than just lying down and taking a nap as well. It's not just that. Rest is actually the foundation for how we liberate ourselves on a personal level, but also collectively.
I think it would be really helpful to actually define what you mean by rest, because I mean, I know that a lot of people, their definition of rest would not be my definition of rest. And similarly, my definition of rest, I realized, within the last year or so, is, perhaps watching TV and scrolling. And that was my definition, my unconscious definition of rest. But actually, that's not very restful, because it's not really resting necessarily my nervous system, my mind, all of the things. So I would just love to hear what your definition of rest is, and perhaps actually what you see kind of society's definition of rest and actually what you see as rest. I think that'd be really helpful context.
Yeah, I think what you touched on there in terms of what we assume to be resting actually isn't. And that's why you'll find a lot of people be like, but I've had a nap and I've been sitting down and I have been watching TV and all this, but I'm still so tired. And that's because, like you say, you're not actually resting. You're just dissociating, really. Yes. It's kind of taking yourself out of the body and thinking that it's a way of decompressing. I think there needs to be a real redefining of what rest is. And for me, it's, although, taking that nap and going to bed and having a better sleep cycle, all of that is profoundly important. For me, rest is about the restoration of self. So that can look thousands of ways to different people than it is to me, than it is to you. It's about being able to nourish what makes you you. And that might not look like just having a nap and go for rest. That might be doing something creative. That might be lying under a tree. That might be meeting with friends. That might be protesting. That might be community action, mutual aid. It could be so many different things that actually bring some sort of rejuvenation and restoration to ourselves. And that's to me what rest is about. It's not just these small acts of pausing. It's a lifelong practice of embodiment. And I think what we have come to understand as rest is still within that, very much within the capitalistic colonial mindset, because we think that rest is anything that's unproductive, that's not doing, that's, being lazy, that's, being very still and, nothing around you, doing nothing, being with no one in a very isolated event. And I think we're having that understanding of rest. That's what the systems of power actually want us to hold on to, because then when we do partake in it, it kind of feeds this individualism of like, it's just me having this resting time. That's what it's about. It's about me taking myself away and nurturing just me. And it's also about, where those feelings of like guilt and shame come in when we rest, because we're thinking, I'm not doing anything, I should be doing this, or I should, all these shoulds come into play. And that's because we're still thinking of rest through that mindset of that it's negative and it's a unaction, when actually it's very active to be resting in a multitude of ways, for your spirit, for your body, for your mind, all these different ways of resting.
Yeah.
The opposite of unproductive activity.
Yeah.
So,
It's so interesting what you've just said there, because even for myself, I really associate rest with, I see rest in a positive way, but I still see it, I suppose, in this subconscious way of like taking time off. So it's still around this not being productive. It's still associated in that programming. But what you've just said there is actually resting is being ourselves, coming back to ourselves, really kind of being authentically ourselves. That's what I hear in that. And that, you can be out there protesting, and if that's what feels most relevant and alive and authentic to you at that time, then that can still be resting. And that's such a different way of looking at rest, because then also for like the shame and the guilt which comes up, which I've experienced, I know a lot of people do experience when they're taking time off or resting, then it's almost like we're feeling guilt and shame around being ourselves in a way.
It's exactly that. It's exactly that, because not having the time and space to be ourselves keeps us disconnected, and that's intentional. Like, our exhaustion is by design. It's the systems at play want us to keep being exhausted and keep being tired, so that we don't slow down enough to realize this doesn't feel right. I don't feel like me, or I need this, I need that, and because all of that goes against the status quo, which, don't want you to be doing. So definitely learning to slow down and rest in all the ways that kind of feel restorative to you is, like you said, like a homecoming to yourself. I mean, that's when you start to, that the veil's lifted, and you start to really see that how we have been living is not in service to us, and it's not for us. It's systems. It's not for humanity.
Yeah. I love these types of seeds, because what's coming up for me now is, on a podcast episode a few weeks ago, we were talking about, loving yourself is a really rebellious act, because there's so much out there which is telling you that you're not enough and financially benefits from you not feeling enough. And and actually loving yourself is a really rebellious act in that way. And what's really coming up for me now is actually resting is a rebellious act into like the powers that be. Because if the powers that be are wanting you to stay in this kind of like productive capitalist go mode, then actually coming back to yourself, resting, is a rebellious act, which makes me feel like I really want to do more of it.
Yeah, exactly. I mean, that's definitely, there's the NAP ministry, and Trisha Herthy, she has her whole kind of ethos around rest is that rest is resistance, because it is, if you're moving away from the status quo, if you're moving away from all of these kind of notions of what productivity and value is, you're reclaiming yourself. And in that, we can start to create something that kind of dismantles the systems that currently hold all the power. So it's very powerful, and that's also how to look at rest as not being this act of not doing anything. It's very, very actionable if it means it's going to be bringing down systems of oppression.
Yeah. Was this something that was always clear to you, or is this something that you had to realize for yourself around rest?
Definitely had to realize. I think just in terms of how we grow up, like this urgency culture that we kind of live under is just embedded into everything. Even if you want to think about, when I think about my doula work, I think about from birth, at the time of birth, where we were born early or late, and someone outside dictated what time and day we should be born, and then we come into the world then, and it goes all the way until you have to be sleep trained at a certain age, you have to go into your own bed at a certain age, and you come off the milk at a certain age, you go to school at a certain age. All of these timelines and deadlines run throughout our lives from the minute we're born, all the way up until, we're adulthood, and like, this is what it means to be an adult, and you have to achieve by this certain amount of time. You have to have your babies at this certain time. And all of these things are kind of running through. So I don't think anyone really has this innate knowing of what it truly means to rest, because society hasn't been set up that way for such a long time. It's been normalized the other way. Yeah. So I definitely have had to have my own kind of unlearning of this. And for me, it wasn't so much about the slowing down aspect. I've always been quite good at lying down and going at my own pace. From a child, I've always wanted to do things in my own time and do things when I want to do it, and just following my intuition in that way. But there are other aspects that I've come to learn it's actually been hindering my relationship to rest, in terms of things like people pleasing. I am a recovering people pleaser. That is something that I'm constantly still unlearning, and that's tied to rest. You kind of make these decisions about your days, your week, your life in service to other people, or to make other people feel more comfortable, whether that is your employer, whether that's your family, whether it's your friends. You we kind of forego these boundaries around it with people pleasing, and that interrupts our relationship to rest. So that's something that I'm still learning, and I think it's ongoing in terms of really kind of radicalizing our relationship to rest. It's ongoing for me, and it's something that I kind of live for. So
yeah, it's so interesting hearing you even speak to how it's so embedded in our language around like birthing and parenting. I would love for you to explain a little bit more around decolonizing rest.
I think when it comes to decolonizing our relationship to rest, and just in general what rest means, we don't realize how intrinsically linked it is to these, well, it's kind of known as the program. So that's colonialism, supremacy, and capitalism, just all under this kind of oppressive experience that we live under. It's so interconnected. It literally feeds into every part of our lives without us realizing that's the power that it holds. It's in our subconscious.
Yeah.
When it comes to these timelines and deadlines and urgency culture and all of these things that are associated with rest and slowing down, we have spent so much of our lives not adhering to that. We've been kind of been doing what we're told, because that is part of supremacy culture, which is there will always be someone who's more of an expert than you. There's always someone to look to for authority rather than for yourself. So we are in this practice of listening to what we're told. So when we're told we have to do things by a certain age, do things by a certain time, rest only on these days and only at these times, and it only looks this way, we listen because that's what we've been programmed to do. And so when it comes to us being burnout, which I currently think at the minute, so many of us are, we're in a collective burnout, and that is intentional. And it's not done from this individual perspective of like, oh, I'm burnout. People don't burn out, systems burn people out. And that is something that I think when it comes to rethinking and sort of reprogramming what we've been told and what we've embodied, that's what it comes to when I mean decolonization is about stopping and pausing and being like, whose voice is that? You know, is that my intuition? Is that me? Or is this what I've been told? Or, you know, where it's coming from? What's, you know, is it actually down to a system at play? Or am I actually kind of upholding something that actually doesn't align with my behaviors or that I want to kind of have, or any values that I have, you know? So we're not robots, but we're treated like it. We are very much treated as if we are human machines, and colonizing is about remembering that we're not that.
I find it really fascinating because I was very burnt out, I think last year, and there wasn't so much about my life that should have been burning me out, but it was more around like what was actually happening inside my head, the expectations that I had of myself, my high achieving. I mean, you say we're a recovering people pleaser. I'm a recovering perfectionist. But it's something really shifted for me when I saw something online, which was being perfectionism is supremacist programming. And I was like, what? But it was really interesting to think about it like that actually perfectionism, the high achieving, the like must do more, never doing enough, must keep going, must be more productive. I hadn't thought about it in that context, that it is this colonial thinking, you know, around perfectionism. I mean, can you speak a little bit more to that?
I mean, I think that's definitely many of us have this, because what perfectionism is rooted in is not feeling good enough, right? So many of us have that because of, you know, what we've been told. If you're not achieving by this time, if you're not doing this, if you're not constantly go, then that's just because you're not good enough, you know, because all the successful people have been able to achieve, and look where they are. And I think that's the issue, is that so many things have been normalized that we've even individualized problems like, oh, I'm a people pleaser, I'm a perfectionist, rather than it being like, no, actually, these are tools that the systems of oppression are intentionally and deliberately using and have bred so that we carry on in this kind of individual thinking, rather than it being like, actually, this is something that you guys have, you know, put on me, and it's not actually anything to do with me. It's something that I now have to unlearn.
Yeah, totally. And, you know, what was really coming up for me there is, in this endless normalizing of stuff, it's really important for us to recognize, like, it might be common, but it's not normal. Like, it's not normal for somebody, well, for a whole collective of people to be burnt out. It's not normal for so many people to be so kind of physically, mentally, emotionally unwell within society. I mean, so many of these things collectively impacting us, they might be common, but they're not normal. And I guess like that's the invitation for like inquiry, isn't it? For the interrogation piece.
Yeah, I think definitely this whole normalization is where it gets dangerous, because if it's, you know, if everything is on fire, then everything's on fire. It's normal to, you know, that's what it is. Rather than us being able to say, like, hold on, do you not see that burning? That shouldn't be happening, you know, like, rather than normalizing this whole, you know, way of living and way of, you know, literally the world is burning, and it's just like, that's what happened. You know, it's kind of feeding that way of losing our humanity and losing our connection to ourselves and each other. So I definitely think normalization is where things can get quite tricky, because also it's hard for you to then pinpoint if everyone's kind of going through the same thing, and you think, oh well, that's just what it is. It is what it is. You just carry on. It doesn't allow you any space to be like, hang on a minute, that doesn't feel right. That actually isn't normal. That shouldn't be the done thing. And what comes with that is if everyone is normalizing something and you're trying to divest, you kind of feel like you're on the outskirts of something. Yeah. And that's uncomfortable. And because one of our most basic human needs is to belong. And so end up coming together, normalizing things that actually are harming us simply because we want to belong. We don't want to be in the outskirts doing something different than what we've been told is true.
Yeah. Yeah, that makes so much sense. And, you know, something that was really coming up for me there when we're talking about, you know, how these oppressive systems and their impact are normalized is then what happens generally is like a whole capitalist market arises in order to meet the problem. So, you know, I know that you've talked about the commodification of rest because, you know, the system kind of causes the issue. I mean, even just within the online space and, you know, Instagram, I mean, there is so much that I get shown of things that I can buy to help me rest, or, you know, adverts for things, almost like kind of gimmicky things, which I'm sure help. And I'm sure there is value in all of these things to some degree. However, can you speak to that commodification of rest?
Definitely. I think, like, you know, especially like in those sort of wellness area of like, this is what it means to rest, and this is what it means to be, you know, holistic in terms of your well-being, and it's essentially buy this and this, consume this and this, and it still feeds into, you know, like into the program, and it therefore means that sort of rest and self-care means that it is only for some and not for, because when you frame rest as something that is a luxury, or, you know, it's a privilege that only some people can have, that means it's not for everybody. And then that, again, that whole individualism of you're lucky to be able to rest because these people can't. And then you feel like it's not for you if you can't afford to buy this healing tincture and this certain red light therapy and this, that, and the other, you know, all of these things, then it's not for you. And you think that, you know, that's just not something that you can have. When rest it's a biological need. We have to eat, we have to drink, and we have to rest. Like it's not something that is reserved for some people. But technology, especially social media, has warped that view of what rest is. And definitely modified it into something that can be purchased rather than something that can be practiced.
Yeah. And, you know, that makes so much sense to what you're saying in terms of the way that it is perhaps, you know, the way that I interpret rest from the way that the wellness space, the online space presents it, is this, you know, taking time off, taking time away, you know, and that there being a lot of privilege around that. But actually what you're saying and what you're really drawing attention to is when we redefine rest as coming back to ourselves, it's no longer this, what we see within the wellness space, the online space of, you know, just taking time out, buying this thing to help us do that, because actually we can't buy something that helps us come back to ourselves. That's up to us.
That's exactly it. So again, it goes with that whole being used to being told what to do by someone else or someone being an expert over ourselves. We're looking to outsource things all the time because we've been taught to not trust ourselves and not listen to ourselves. Some of us might not even be able to actually understand what our intuition is or what our body is calling for. And so we are looking outward for it because we live in a society that is under capitalism that usually looks like buying something, whether it is buying a service from someone to help you rest, or it's a product or a thing to help you rest. We end up putting all the power onto these material things that are outside of us. When really it's all inside. We've all got it, and it's very, very simple. I think that's what helps with the capitalistic mindset of rest is we're convinced that it's really difficult to do. It's something that we need help with in terms of having things and stuff with us, when actually it's very, very simple and slowing down and bringing really mindful, simple things into your day that usually feel uncomfortable for you because you're so unused to it. It's not something that you do.
Yeah. Just before, because I want to ask you what those mindful things are, but just before we go, a question arose to me of how do we know if we are well rested or if we're dissociated? Because you were saying earlier around, you know, when I brought in this example of like watching TV, scrolling on my phone, and that's actually numbing out. And like, don't get me wrong, I actually think sometimes it's, you know, I've just done 18 months of trauma training. So there were times where I actually just wanted to numb out. I didn't want to think about anything. So, you know, there's a time and a place for that also. However, you know, I guess that what I hear within that is a lot of people are probably not well rested. They think they might be well rested because they might do these things, you know, quote unquote, to be rested, but actually they're just disassociated. And that being, you know, to what you've said, how the oppressed society continues on. So can you just speak to that, of how we know the difference within ourselves?
The main way you'll know the difference is your body will tell you. If you're dissociating, you're still going to feel tired, you're going to feel groggy, you might have headaches, you might have digestive issues, you might go to bed at certain times but still wake up more exhausted than you went to bed. You're going to have all of these signals that your body is telling you that it's not resting. You're able to feel that, you know, something's not quite right. But sometimes you feel like, oh, I need to cry, but nothing's happening. Like I can't cry. It's those kind of things. It's those kind of feelings. Whereas if you are practicing true rest and embodying that, your body again will let you know in the way that it won't be showing these issues in terms of your sleep or digestion or the way that you move through life or how overstimulated you get or how overwhelmed you get. So I think it always comes back to listening to your body. And that's where it gets difficult, because I think many of us either don't know how to listen or think that we are and don't realize that we're actually ignoring our body in the subtlest, simplest ways all of the time. I mean, how many times do you need to go to the toilet in the day and you don't go for whatever reason it is? You know, if maybe you know you're so tired and I probably should go to bed, but let me just watch this one more episode. I probably should eat, but I've got so many things to go on. Oh my gosh, it's been 4 hours and I haven't eaten. You know, these are the simple kind of ways that we kind of self-abandon our body. And it's responding to that, and it's reacting to that, and it's letting us know, but we're just not tuned in enough to be able to hear what it's saying. And to be able to do that, we have to slow down. We have to be able to sometimes get in that uncomfortableness of being with our bodies with no other distraction to kind of hear what it's saying to us.
That slowing down piece. I mean, I know a lot of people who struggle with that, but you know, I can really relate to that, you know, from just bringing in a different example, which is kind of not to do with rest, but, you know, I guess it's about 8 years ago. I wasn't getting a regular cycle. I had PCOS. I had lots of different hormonal symptoms, and I decided to treat my body holistically and naturally, because there was nothing that medicine could provide me with, and there was, you know, it was untreatable, uncurable, all of the things. So it was a journey that I took myself on, but I was so disconnected from my body, you know, this is when I was 27, that was a big journey for me, of actually being able to listen to my body and, you know, testing out which foods felt inflammatory for me and which ones didn't. At the beginning, I couldn't tell that, because I just didn't have this like body literacy. But by slowing down, I started to actually really tune in with like my energy levels, like my mood, things like that, which seem like such, you know, how am I feeling today? It just seemed like such a kind of crazy thing at the beginning of like, how do I even know that? But it was through this process of slowing down and starting to listen to my body. And that was a process. So, you know, I'm just relating to that experience from my own personal experience. But I would love for you to talk about slowing down and how can we do it? What does that look like? Do people like it?
Most people don't like it. If it's not something that you have been practicing for a while, or, you know, if it doesn't feel like it's of any use to you, you won't like it, because it is a different way of living than what we've been conditioned to. But it is, like I was saying before, very, very simple. So when you're first starting to practice slowing down, you first need to understand that it's a practice. That means you are going to fail over and over and over and over again. But that's the point of a practice. You just keep showing up each day, bit by bit. And eventually it will get to a point where some things aren't as uncomfortable as they were before, and some things feel a bit more like you've got more time and space to be able to breathe into your decisions. And that's lifelong. There's not like an end kind of, you know, destination with that, because even in my own journey with resting and learning to slow down, it's all up here. I know what makes sense and what to do, but then I still find myself kind of cramming more things than I know that my body can handle into a day. And then at the end of the week, I'm so exhausted, and I'm like, why? I shouldn't be exhausted. Why have I done? I'm not realizing that actually these are the little ways that you've not taken time. These are the little ways that you've not made self-honoring decisions that kind of give you that room. And you have to have a mix of boundaries, so you know what it is that you will or won't do, whether that's up here, you know, I really want to go to that place, or I really want to kind of do these things, but that is going to mean doing these 3 things in one day, and I know my body doesn't respond to doing more than 2 things in a day. So therefore that boundary is, I will have to reschedule this other thing, or, you know, something like that. So it's a mix of boundaries as well as this self-compassion, because we're constantly in our head telling ourselves, I should be doing this, I shouldn't be doing this, all of that kind of stuff. So we need a mix of having grace and self-compassion for ourselves, as well as having these boundaries. And that's something that I am practicing every day as someone who is home educating their children, as someone who's kind of looking after the home, as someone who's working, as someone who's a daughter, who's a granddaughter, has all these kind of responsibilities, and just navigating through life. And there will be times where I've like, no, I've done too much this week. No, now let me regroup in this way. And it's just coming back to that, it always being a practice and being able to really simplify the way we move through our days. That's the key. And even if that means like not multitasking as much, We constantly, you know, like we might be brushing our teeth and reading something at the same time. We might be making a cup of tea and reading something. Like, you know, there's all these different ways that we've normalized multitasking. And
celebrated multitasking.
It's celebrating. It's a skill. It's seen as a skill now. You know, you'll put it down like, I work really well under pressure. I'm really good at getting things done in a fast-paced environment. Or this is not something that we're inherently good at. It's not a skill. It's a myth that we have been led to believe is a skill, so that we can then they can be manipulated by the systems, basically.
There's this tendency for it to be like tick boxes of just like, I do all the things, and that makes me feel like, you know, like I'm good. I'm a good wellness person. And I noticed that within myself. You know, this is quite some years ago, I recognized that within my, you know, my yoga practice, my meditation, my spiritual practices, things like that, I'd come to see myself as either doing like well or not well. Like if I was ticking them off, then I was like a good, you know, a good spiritual person. And if I wasn't, then I'd like fallen out off my practices. And it really dawned on me that like I brought my not enough productive programming into the things that were supposed to be making me feel good and close to my essence of who I am, which I just wanted to highlight, because, you know, what I heard you say there was like, it's a practice, slowing down. And I know for myself, and, you know, for clients that I work with, like, you know, oh, I did really badly at that this week, that type of thing. And I think for those people listening to this conversation, it's like a takeaway of, it is a practice. So you don't have to get it right, you know, all of the time.
No, it's about a devotion to rest. It's about a devotion to yourself, right?
Yes.
And within that comes honoring the fact that you're human. You know, not everything is perfect, and that's the whole point of our humanness. And it's being able to sit in those imperfections and kind of break away from that binary thinking of good and bad, because again, that is kind of upholding the status quo of like, if you do this, you're good. If you do that, you're bad. And let's get you into this box, and let's get you into this mold. Despite what your body or your mind says, this actually doesn't feel right. This doesn't feel like me. I don't know who I am. Decisions I should be making. I feel stuck. I feel overwhelmed, all of that. But on the outside, I'm doing all the things I should be doing, but it's where are these shoulds coming from? That's a key part, I think.
Yeah, totally. I'd love for you to speak a little bit more to these kind of tangible, small, but obviously very powerful things that we can be doing, you know, within our lives, within our day. Because, you know, a few things came up for me of like, you know, knowing how many clients I can see a day, and that being a cap, even if there is a gap in my schedule, I still have a capacity on that. And that is a boundary that I now stick to. But even things with like making decisions of like, do you want to do this thing? I think like old me would have been like, yes, absolutely. Or like, no, thanks. But now I've really normalized within myself being like, you know, thanks so much for the offer of that. Give me 24 hours, 48 hours, or, you know, give me a week, or I'll come back to you soon, just to give me a little bit of time to feel into it for myself. And also with like text messages or, you know, WhatsApps, we all get so many messages all of the time. I'm not a great texter. I'm pretty bad at replying to things. So instead of it being this like, sorry that I hadn't gotten back to you, it's like, thanks for your patience, because, you know, because I know that I've just been me doing my stuff. So, you know, there were just those things that came up for me of things that have shifted for me. But I would love for you to, you know, for you to give your for you to speak to that.
There are definitely some key things that I definitely would encourage people to kind of look at in terms of how much we normalize busyness. You know, it's almost kind of like a status symbol, isn't it? Books and busy. So that's, you know, that's something that we need to kind of move away from, in terms of even just in terms of how much we respond to people. It doesn't have to be immediate. It doesn't have to be 24/7. We're kind of moving at this pace that our body cannot handle. Like our bodies can't handle how quickly we're moving in terms of communicating and being able to have access to each other 24/7. That's not how we're supposed to be in relationship with each other. That's not how it's supposed to be. So I in any way that we can divest from that and say, actually, I'm going to take 48 hours. My normal kind of responses in 48 hours, I will then come back to you, or, you know, I block out a certain bit for my day. You can also do it in terms of like if sort of organization is something that feels comforting to you in terms of going about your life, in terms of the calendar and stuff like that, you can block out those kind of rest schedules within that. Here I'm going to do 3 hours of work and 3 hours of rest, whatever that looks like, and you can put a detailed into that as much as you want. I think it's kind of also including the body into our decisions when we're bringing these kind of restful practices in. It's like getting used to checking in with ourselves, like, how am I feeling? What does my body feel like doing today? What do I have to do? What's actually a requirement for today that I have to do, and what can actually be rescheduled? Because we'll find that most of the things that we treat as urgent, I think being able to do certain practices like that with work-related stuff, but as well as just in terms of coming to ourselves when we're making these decisions of what we want to do for the day or for the week or for our lives, so we have like 3 voices in our head when we're making a decision. We have the first that's like, don't do it. So it will be the first thing telling you to, like, don't rest, don't do this, you've got this, this, and this to do. And then a second voice comes in and says, no, do it. And you kind of operate between these 2 voices of do it, don't do it, do it, don't do it. And that's when we can get stuck. And that's when we're like, I'm not sure which decision to follow, or which I should be kind of following with. And we need to cultivate this third voice that says, well, who said that? So who's telling you to don't do it, and who's telling you to do it? Because if your body is telling you, I am exhausted, I feel it in my bones, I need to rest, but your mind is saying, well, you got to do this deadline, but you have to do this, that, and the other, you know, which voice are you going to be listening to? Because you said what? One is you, and one is society. One is an expectation that has been placed on you. And so getting into that practice of being able to pause every time we make a decision, whether it comes down to simple things like, I'm going to make a cup of tea. Can I actually sit and enjoy this cup of tea as a singular moment? Can I sit down and watch the kettle boil and watch the steam come up from the tea as it brews and sip it in with no rush? Can I have moments for that rather than it being like, let me grab a quick coffee and let me grab a quick while I'm doing something else? And you can be able to make these decisions from a place of full embodiment, because our body's involved in it. We've got them included in it, rather than just these kind of surface level tick box things.
Yeah. That's really helpful. It makes a lot of sense. I knew this conversation was going to be really helpful for me. I just wanted to weave into simplicity, because, you know, I know that you'd mentioned around simplicity, and I know that we've touched on it within the conversation, but I just want to speak to it directly, because, I mean, it's in the word, it seems like a simple thing to do, but in practice, it's challenging, right? So can you speak to simplicity and really kind of bringing this back and inviting simplicity into our lives?
But yeah, it is something that's uncomfortable, which sounds funny because it's like, it's just simplifying things. It's, you know, how can that be uncomfortable or even stressful? Because it's so different to the norm of what we are used to living. Yeah. And it's really about stripping back. Like I was mentioned before, in terms of making a decision of realizing what's actually urgent and what isn't. You can be able to structure your life in a way that focuses on the bare minimums, you know, meeting your needs in all the way that feels restorative to you, and being aware of what decisions and what choices are added on for the sake of expectations and sort of outside judgment, you know. So practicing simplicity is really simple, and it is in those moments of what you do throughout the day, how you get dressed, you know. Maybe it could be down to you have yourself a uniform of what you wear at home, so that takes away decision overwhelm for you. maybe it's a case of what you're eating throughout the day, when you're eating, keeping that really simple, so you're not having to have these moments of gaps of where like, oh, I should have eaten, but I haven't eaten, all these hours have gone by and I haven't. But you've got it kind of set out in terms of like organizing. But it's also about again, listening to the body in what feels like you're stepping into overwhelm. Because so many of our decisions, we feel it already. Like if we know we have to do something and start sweating and our body starts heating up and we start thinking and our mind starts racing and we can't sleep, and what is it that's causing those bodily reactions, and how can we reduce them and start to question life's demands like a responsibility, or are they a cultural expectation? Again, so like it is being able to break that down and to be able to include simplicity in your lives. And it can be down to simple things like you go, I keep saying simple when I'm talking about simplicity, but it's just you go.
I put it into your head, sorry.
Like you're going for a walk and you leave your phone at home and see what that brings up for you. That sounds very simple. That doesn't sound difficult at all. But just try it, because you're so used to having your phone in your hand, whether you're looking at the time or you were listening to something, you're going for a walk, go for a walk without that and see how that walk feels different. And then there is being in nature, if that feels comfortable to you, because I know it doesn't feel comfortable for everybody, but going and kind of practicing the art of noticing, what do you see around you? What does the tree look like? What shape does it make? What are the leaves like? What colors are they? So it's just really kind of micro meditation moments where you are forced to be with just yourself and what is in your immediate surroundings, not having technology or not having kind of sensory overload in any way in terms of like music, people, traffic, all that kind of stuff. If you're able to simplify it and not have those external things around and just have those micro meditation moments where you're able to just listen to your breath. It's shallow? Is it fast? Is it through your nose? Is it through your mouth? These are kind of these simple practices that you can do. And the more you do them, the more they will just become like second nature to you. And you'll realize that your whole pace is starting to slow down. The whole pace is starting to notice what's around you. And the more you slow down, the more you notice, the more you notice, the more you slow down.
You've mentioned that you're a mum, you work, there are other responsibilities within your life. How do you practice rest with your kids?
It's an interesting one. It's our way of life. It's very much in little things like we co-sleep. So we've never had a case of someone's had to get up and go to another room, or, had to get up out of the middle of the night to comfort them or anything like that. We've just always been together, and that has led us to be able to have more sleep in that way. But also we wake up together, we have a slow morning. It's just in everything that we do. I home educate my children as well. So we don't have to stick to timelines. We don't have to be out of the door by a certain time. We don't have to be dressed by a certain time. We don't have to be, our days are not dictated by certain time frames. So that's something that is quite a big thing in terms of as a family practicing rest. And I just include it in every kind of day that we have, whether that is, I have two very different children. My eldest is very similar to me in terms of she's very creative and she loves some like kind of arts and crafts, and she will happily sit down and paint and draw something in or make a potion in the garden. And my youngest is like Tasmanian devil. He's got energy everywhere. And it's managing those two can sometimes, you kind of have to find somewhere that's in the middle, and it's finding those crafts that maybe we can do outside. And my youngest has got this space to kind of climb and run about and bounce off the fences, and that feels good to him, while my other one is making something in the corner. And it's just going at a slower pace so I can be able to meet those needs of those two different personalities that I have, as well as centering my own as well. And just being like, okay, with the communication, I guess, it's like, you know, Mama is feeling very tired today. I need to be doing this, and I can only do this, this, and this with you. And just kind of getting them used to having, you know, those boundaries. Like, I'm not always going to say yes to something, and maybe let's work together to find an alternative that keeps you happy, that keeps me happy. And it's all rooted in doing things at our own pace, and making that our kind of family time, rather than it being outside, that you need to do this, 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 and aim at a certain time.
Yeah. And what I hear there is actually like educating our kids around rest as a way of life, and rest, you know, I love what you said earlier, as like rest as devotion as well. And really instilling that and normalizing that compared to the messages that society has around rest. You know, I really hear that within the communication that you have with your kids around that, of normalizing it. And, you know, coupled with the seeing rest as when we are in ourselves, you know, when we are connected to ourselves, you know, talking about when your daughter's doing crafts and your son's like bouncing off the walls, you know, in a way, it's like, we might not look at, you know, a situation like that as like resting, because we're so conditioned with this, like resting is like lying down and, you know, napping. But actually, when we look at it through this lens of like, resting is when we're connecting with ourselves, when we're being ourselves, when we're framing it in that kind of way, then, you know, being able to communicate that with our kids just seems so powerful.
Yeah, it really is. I think being able to have this time when they're so young, to be able to just give them the space of feeling who they are, figuring it out, and just being a witness to it rather than trying to kind of dominate it. That's been able to let me see what speaks to them, what they want to do, how they want to move through. And like I'm saying, like when my son is kind of bouncing off the walls, that is rest to him. Him kind of playing outside and being able to throw sticks and jump up a tree, and that's restorative to him. So I make sure that he has ample time to be able to do that. And with children that are around my children's ages, who are 3 and 6, it's all about play. Rest can be done through play as well, no matter in what direction or however that looks. And I think a lot of the pressure that parents feel in terms of struggling when it comes to being able to rest as a family and rest as a parent is, again, down to what decisions are you making that actually center you and the children that you have in front of you and their needs, rather than it being like, well, they're at this age, so they should go to this club, that class, you know, end up overscheduling our kids' days, and that's becomes normal. And that's just what you do to keep them busy, to keep them stimulated. We're constantly sold this thing of like, kids need to be stimulated all the time. And if that then becomes their norm, that's how, you know, they grow up. That's how we've grown up, and believing that, well, that's how life is, to constantly be stimulated, and we don't know how to be with boredom. And we don't know what comes up with that. And actually having that practice of like, no, you can simplify their schedule, simplify your own schedule, and be bored together. You don't have to fill up every moment. And that in itself is restful.
Amazing. I would love to just ask you one more question, because I know that I've kept you here for a little while now. So I just wanted to ask you one more question, which was really around this, you seeing this work and this decolonization of rest and the art of slowing down really as moving towards this place of collective healing and liberation. I would love for you to speak to that, you know, instead of just us seeing rest as this individualized experience. I'd love for you just to speak to this collective liberation too within that.
Yeah, well, I think like what we've been saying in terms of slowing down and resting allows us to kind of come back to ourselves and understand ourselves on a deeper level. And if we're able to do that with ourselves, then we're able to do it with each other, and we're able to do that with the land around us. And that is what ends up fueling this collective care, because you can't do anything alone. Like, even in the simple practices of, I want to take this day for myself, therefore I need childcare, and I need to sort this, that, and the other out. I can't do it just by myself. I have to have others in place to support that. And I will therefore then pour into those people so they can get their time. And I think when we come together to practice rest, we end up seeing how much of our power is within each other as a collective, how much we can change, and what we've normalized, we can together normalize something else that feels in way more alignment with us and feels way more to the cause of justice, right? Because we have that time to be able to listen to our bodies. We have that time to be able to actually say, no, that's not the voice that I want to follow. This is how I want to live. This is the future that I want to create. And we can only imagine that if we rest, if we slow down, if we have time to even connect with those thoughts and those feelings. And doing it together is where that power comes in, and that change can actually happen. And we're more capable to engage in struggles of justice if we're doing it together. So we're not doing it together.
Yeah.
How we're set up, like humans need each other.
Yes, I love that. And just to build on that, I lied. It was like 1.5 questions. Just to build on that, you know, I have a kind of final question of, what would you love to see happen within this space for collective healing and liberation? I mean, it might be simple as like, just rest some more, but what would you love to see happen?
I mean, it's definitely like rest some more. I would love to see on a collective level that us really leaning into slowing down and resting and taking back power, in that we end up dismantling these systems of oppression. If we are reclaiming back our time, capitalism is going to fall. If we reclaim back our humanity and our connection to each other, colonialism is going to fall. So there are all these things that might seem very basic, but in doing so and us all practicing it, this system won't be able to continue and will have to crumble, and we therefore can then build something that looks a little bit more aligned with our humanness. And that's something that I would love to see. I hope that in the future that there's no need for rest to be a resistance. You know, I hope that in the future my kids' generation are going to be like, what's burnout? We've never had that before. Like, you know, that's what I hope for. I hope that there's no need for me to be doing what I'm doing, speaking about what I'm speaking out, because it's going to be such a thing of the past, because we've been working towards this new future.
Amazing. Anything else that you wanted to add to the conversation that we haven't touched on?
I don't know. I think we've kind of covered a lot of things. There is something that I have read recently that I wanted to bring forth, because I thought it was just an interesting approach to things like burnout and rest. Is there's an author called Evie Muir, and she just brought out a book called Radical Rest, and it's an incredible book that everyone should read. And in it, she mentions that there are many neurologists that have said that the way the brain reacts to burnout is almost the exact ways that it reacts to trauma. So technically, burnout is like a chronic illness, and its approach will not be in a nap, but in a trauma-informed approach. And I just find that so powerful, because I feel burnout has become this almost like a buzzword, and it's like, oh, I'm so burnt out today, I'm going to go take a nap. Oh, I'm so burnt out, I'm just going to watch a film. And then you're fine again. It's like, no, burnout is so much more than just feeling a little bit of tiredness. the way our body is responding to it is that it is a trauma. And if so many of us are on this kind of collective burnout cycle, what does that mean for us as a society? And we really need to look at how our approach is not going to be in very surface level things, but in that trauma-informed space.
Yeah, amazing. I'm definitely going to get that book myself, and I'll link that in the show notes because it sounds like an amazing read. So thank you for that suggestion too. Thank you so much for your time today. This has been amazing. I feel like I've personally benefited so much from this conversation. So yeah, it's been so great to connect with you, and just thank you so much for your time.
Thank you for having me.
Thank you for listening. It's great to have you with me on this journey towards higher love for all. Our time is our greatest commodity and gift, so thanks for investing it in yourself and sharing it with me. Please do take a moment to rate and review the show, all of which enables more people to find me and for me to connect with more great guests each week for both yours and my enjoyment. All links, references, and contact information is detailed too within the show notes. And I always love to hear your feedback. So feel free to hit me up on my Instagram at higherlove_with_Megan or via my website, higher-love.com. Send your takeaways, and if you enjoyed this episode, please share or send on to someone else who would benefit. Until next time, big love.